Hello viewers, welcome to CEC Gurukul lectures. I am Dr. Sanawar Soham from Department of Botany, Kalindi College, University of Delhi, and as you know, we were discussing the various factors that affect the distribution of insolation while we were discussing the factors such as light and temperature, which are the ecological factors in the ecology series. So now let's begin with the factors that affect the distribution of insolation. So as I already told, the amount of radiation which is absorbed or reflected depends upon several factors, including the angle of incidence of radiation, the topography of the region, and color of the land surface. Smooth, rough, water and ice covered surfaces reflect different proportions of radiation. Rough surfaces have low albedo than smooth surfaces. Now, light colored surfaces reflect more radiation than dark surfaces. Some factors that regulate the amount of insolation reaching the Earth's surface per unit have been listed below. Now, let's begin with the angle of incidence or the inclination of sun's rays. The angle of incidence or the angle which the sun's rays make with the Earth's surface determines the amount of solar radiation received by the Earth. Reflectivity depends upon the angle of incident radiation. Now, a smaller angle means that some amount of radiation will be received and it will serve a larger area on the Earth. The intensity will be less concentrated. The surfaces that are less perpendicular to the sun rays reflect more radiation than surfaces which are not at right angles with the incoming radiation. A large angle means the sun's rays will be nearly vertical over the place and amount will serve as a smaller area. As a result, the radiation received will be more concentrated and the intensity will be greater. At 45 degrees latitude, the amount of radiation received is only 75%. The amount of radiation which is received at the equator is more. Arctic, Antarctic regions and the poles, they receive only 40 to 50% of the radiations respectively. Now moving on to the duration of sunshine. This is the second factor. So the amount of solar radiation which is received by Earth depends upon the duration of time for which the sun shines over a particular place. At equator, the duration of sunshine is 12 hours throughout the year. Hence, the amount of radiation received is more compared to the other places on the Earth. In winter solstice, that is 22nd December, the southern hemisphere receives more sunshine because of summer there, while at summer solstice, which is 21 June, the northern hemisphere receives more sunshine as it is the summer time there. So solstice is the time when sun reaches its highest position in the sky as seen from the north or the south pole. Now let's discuss the third factor, which is the transparency of the atmosphere. As the name suggests, you can very well understand that the amount of cloud cover and its thickness, the dust and water vapor present in it also determine the rate of absorption, reflection as well as transmission of the solar radiation. So this factor is very effective and is very important in understanding or looking at the amount of solar energy which is trapped. Now when the wavelength of the radiation is more than the radius of the obstructing particle, such as a gas, then scattering of radiation takes place. The scattering happens. In contrast, if the wavelength is less than the obstructing particle, such as dust particle, then reflection takes place. So, absorption of solar radiation takes place if the obstructing particles happens to be water vapor, ozone molecules, carbon dioxide molecules or clouds. Now next one is land-sea differential. So the temperature of the air resting over a land mass differs markedly from the resting over a water body which is present at the same latitude, right? So there are differentially marked means they have variation in the temperature. Reflection of radiation is more by land than by sea. Average penetration of insolation is more in water, which is up to 20 meters, than in land, which is just up to 1 meter. The specific heat of water, we all know, is 2.5 times higher than the land mass. Therefore, water takes longer to get heated up and cool down. This is the reason why land cools more rapidly than water. Moreover, the water currents, tides and drifts exist only in oceans which carry the heat to the lower layers. This delays the process of heating and cooling. Snow covered areas, they reflect up to 70 to 90% of insolation. Now, moving on to the next factor, winds. So, prevailing winds, the oceanic winds have the moderating influence on the sea and coastal areas. These areas have cool summers and mild winters. The effect is so pronounced only on the windward or the outer side, whereas the leeward side or the interior side do not get the moderating effect of the sea, and hence they experience extremes of temperature. So, there in such areas in the leeward side there is experience of extremes of temperature. Now, moving on to the next factor, slope. Slope also affects the amount of solar radiation which is trapped, which is taken up by the earth. The direction and angle of slope control the amount of solar radiation which is received. Slopes more exposed to the sun will receive more solar radiation. This type of response has been noted in the Himalayan region. Now, next important factor is the ocean currents. Ocean currents, they influence the temperature of land areas considerably. Now, warm currents, they raise the temperature of the coastal areas, whereas the cold currents, they lower. So, these ocean currents also influence, they affect the temperature as well as the light which is absorbed. At higher altitudes, the eastern coasts have lower temperatures due to influence of cold currents. Westerly winds, they produce the moderating effects on the land surfaces. The influence of ocean currents is more pronounced in tropics. So, in tropical regions, ocean currents, they influence the ecological factor light and temperature to a greater extent. Now, moving on to the next factor, which is altitude. The amount of insolation received varies from latitude to latitude, but altitude has a direct effect on surface temperatures. Lower layers of the atmosphere are compressed under atmospheric pressure. The earth being closer to sun's surface, it becomes warmer. At higher altitudes, the temperature gradually decreases and the air becomes cooler. The variations are noted in different seasons, different locations on the earth for better understanding. Moving on to the next important factor, which is latitude. There is a variation in distribution of radiation according to change in the latitudes. Decrease in radiation from equator towards the pole is noted on a global scale. The radiation strikes lower latitudes directly, and at latitudes below 40 degrees, more solar radiation is received by Earth and rest of it is lost. At higher latitudes, the incident radiation of low intensity falls obliquely on the surface. It travels through the atmosphere and spreads through a greater area. The radiation also penetrates deeper into the atmosphere. More heat is lost than received. So, the vertical beam falling or near or the equator is more intense. This is the main reason for decline in mean annual temperature from the equator towards the poles. The atmosphere and oceans, they act as giant thermal engines that transfer heat from the tropics towards the poles. Wind and ocean currents help in transportation of heat energy from lower to higher altitudes. Thus, the transfer of heat energy from the lower latitudes to the higher latitudes maintains an overall balance over the Earth's surface. Moving on to the next important factor, light and its distribution, how it is distributed and how this distribution affects the living organisms globally. So, we know that the variation in light affects the global organisms of distribution of living organisms. The intensity, that is the amount of light per unit area over a particular time, the quality, that is the wavelength composition, and duration or the photo period, they play a crucial role in origin and development of plant and animal species. Now, light influences distribution of terrestrial species. The composition of plant species vary according to the availability of the light. This is because light plays a crucial role in development of plants. Plants absorb radiation, particularly the red and the blue regions of the spectrum. Now, what they do? The variation in the light in the terrestrial ecosystems results due to changes in the interception of light by the vegetation. In forests, the canopy of trees receive maximum radiation, whereas herbs and shrubs, they receive the light which is filtered after the use by a tree canopy. Hence, in the forest light is efficiently utilized, though it is only 1% of the incident solar radiation because the canopy absorbs efficiently. Plants also show preferences for utilization of light. Some plants prefer growing in bright light, while others they grow on in shady areas. So, the plants have been classified accordingly. The plants which are shade loving, which prefer to grow in shady areas are known as sciophytes, and another ones are the heliophytes. These are known as light loving plants because they grow in the areas with bright light. Some heliophytes that can grow in shade are termed as facultative sciophytes. They can grow, but mostly heliophytes, they love light, they require light. So, those which can also grow in shade are called as facultative sciophytes. Now, similarly, sciophytes that can grow in bright light are termed as facultative heliophytes. So, the plants harness light energy for photosynthesis. We all know that. The intensity of light at which energy is harnessed via photosynthesis is sufficient to meet the energy requirements of respiration, which is called as light compensation point. Now, under shade conditions, plants do not have much energy to carry on photosynthesis. Why? Because light is not reaching there. The filtered light is reaching there. So, the canopy of tree functions above the compensation point. In aquatic systems, vertical stratification of light intensity occurs with increasing depths. That also solves the purpose, and with each vertical stratification there is variety of compensation points. Now, the spectral quality of light changes due to differences in light penetration in water. Generally, less than 1% of sunlight can penetrate up to a depth of 30 meter in water. The light penetration also gets reduced when the substandard materials such as silt, clay, planktons are present in water. Now, clear and pure water absorbs light at rapid rate and causes profound changes in its spectral distribution. The red and blue wavelengths are mostly filtered out and greenish light penetrates at greater depth. Light compensation point reaches at a certain depth called as compensation depth. The zones above and below this depth are referred to as photic and aphotic zones. What is aphotic zones? A lake is usually divided into 3 zones depending upon the intensity of light received. The littoral zone, which includes areas where light penetrates. In this zone, mainly aquatic plants grow. Then comes the profundal zone. The profundal zone includes deep areas where light penetrates and is used for photosynthesis by the plants. Then this area lies below the compensation depth. The limnatic zone lies above the profundal zone and it extends outward from the littoral zone. The planktons are predominantly present in this area. Various activities of living organisms are regulated by light. Breeding, migration in animals, flowering, seed germination in plants are controlled by the length of the day, that is, the period of light and darkness. This behavioral phenomena is called photoperiodism. Some plants such as radish, potatoes, spinach require light for more than 12 hours per day to induce flowering. These are called as long day plants. In contrast to the plants such as tobacco, dahlia, it requires light of less than 12 hours for blooming. These plants which require shorter periods of light, they are known as short day plants. The orientation and movement of plants and animals is affected by light. In plants, the phenomena is called as phototropism. Photoperiodism plays an important role in life of organisms and also affects their distribution to a significant extent. These responses are diurnal, lunar or annual, and the biological rhythms are controlled by light. This light is an important factor, ecological factor, which affects the ecosystem. Reproduction and migration in birds are annual photoperiodic responses. Photoperiodic responses are also noted in animals, not just in plants. Light is necessary for the activation of gonads, which carry the essential reproductive processes in many animals. For example, in salmon, light accelerates the development of larvae. In contrast, in other animals like Mytilus, the development is retarded in the presence of light. The direction of movement of insects is also regulated by light. Birds use sunlight as a means of orientation and migration. So, protective coloration, mimicry is also affected by light. So, light basically affects many processes, not just in plants but also in animals. If we talk of aquatic organisms, the productivity of aquatic organisms is influenced by light. Photosynthesis gets affected by light and brings changes in the populations of plankton, nekton, cephalopods and decapods. Now, let's move on to the third important ecological factor, temperature. We all know light and temperature, they both are connected to each other and they both are influenced by the solar radiation. So, let's move on to the study of temperature and how it affects the ecosystem. We all know temperature is important abiotic factor which is crucial for existence of living organisms. It regulates various essential activities like growth as well as reproduction. Temperature shows variation from region to region depending upon the topography, the latitude and longitude. Temperature varies according to the geography of the region. The geographical area, the geographical distribution affects temperature directly, indirectly. Temperature gradients depend upon the presence of barriers such as mountain ranges and ocean currents. Now, let's discuss the latitudinal and altitudinal variations that are caused by temperatures and affect the growth of plants and animals and earth. Variations in temperature on earth occur from changes in the incoming solar radiation and distribution of land and water masses. Now, physical factors such as movement of wind, water, direction of slopes of hills and mountains also bring alteration in the temperature. The length of day varies with the latitudes. Now, the rate of incoming solar radiation varies from region to region. On an average, every point on Earth gets the same hours of sunlight, that is 12 hours per day, but the rate of heat received varies. This depends upon the amount of radiant energy which is delivered unit area per hour and angle of the incident light. So, basically, even if we say that on average every point on Earth gets 12 hours a day of sunlight, the heat, it is not necessary that all these 12 hours, the amount of heat which will be perceived, which will be taken up, will be equal or will be same. So, it varies. It basically varies, and it depends on the amount of radiant energy delivered, unit area per hour, and the angle of incident light. The vertical beam of radiation is more intense than the oblique beam. We all understand that the amount of incident radiant energy per unit area increases along the latitudes. So, at lower altitudes, the rate of warming by absorption of solar radiation is greater than rate of cooling of the outgoing infrared radiations, and the reverse is true for higher altitudes, that is, rate of cooling is more than the rate of absorption. The poles receive only 40% of radiant energy of that received by the equator. The places located at same latitude, they show difference in temperatures. And why it happens? It happens because of the movement of hot, cold air currents and water masses that are present in the region. So, depending upon the movement of hot air or cold air is passing through, or what type of water masses are present in the particular region that is under study, based on that, the places located at the same latitude will also show differences in temperature. Examples are cities of Calcutta and Nagpur. They both are located at the same latitude, but the temperature in Calcutta is regulated by sea, which is present in proximity, right? Whereas in Nagpur, because it is away from the sea, because there is no such water body present nearby, so even if they are at the place at the same latitude, they show variation in absorption, variation in temperature. Land and water absorb heat differently, and this produces contrast in temperature within the same latitude. How is it possible? The temperature at these places show diurnal and seasonal variations, right? The three distinct heat zones have been distinguished in each hemisphere based on the temperature variations. These includes hot torrid zone, which are found near the equator, moderate or temperate zones, which are located in middle, and the cold zone, which is located at the poles. So, these three distinct, basically the equator, the temperate and the cold zones, these and the torrid zone, based on these, based on the zonation, based on the where they are present, is it near the equator, or is it near the poles, or is it in the moderate zone? So, depending upon torrid, temperate and cold zone, the temperature is which is basically maintained in a particular place varies. It varies in three zones. Now, each temperature zone comprises of a particular vegetation and animal species. If we talk of now altitudinal variations, temperature decreases with increasing altitude. This is mainly due to changes in the convection in the troposphere. The lower layer of the atmosphere is troposphere. So, temperature, what happens? It decreases with increasing altitude. And why it is happening? It is happening due to the change in the convection of the lower layers, the atmospheric lower layers. The air present on the Earth's surface gets heated up by solar radiation. The convection currents, they transport air from the lower to the higher region and vice versa. So when the air from the sea level rises to upper atmosphere, it expands and increases in volume. So during the expansion of gases, the molecules push aside the neighboring molecules, losing their kinetic energy, leading to decrease in temperature. So the conditions of temperature in which no change of heat takes place between the system and surrounding is termed as adiabatic change. Now, various regions of Earth's surfaces, they possess temperature ranges with an annual mean temperature. The continental land masses have broad temperature ranges. The southern hemisphere has less temperature variation than the northern hemisphere, and this is because southern hemisphere has more masses of water. Now, in the upcoming lecture, I will be discussing global temperature variation and other factors that influence the growth of plants and animals and overall ecosystem. Thank you very much.